This is unbelievable. Fox News alerted the FBI thwarting an explosive drone attack against the UFC Freedom 250 event at the White House South Lawn last Sunday and have already taken 5 suspects into custody out of the 23 that were involved.
The multi-phase terror plot allegedly involved using drones filled with explosives to strike buildings in the vicinity, sparking mass panic to drive the fleeing crowd toward a pre-staged sniper team. A second wave of attackers then allegedly planned to storm the White House gate.
The Vice President, JD Vance, was at that event on Sunday, and he joins us now to react. Mr. Vice President, thank you for coming on. Congratulations on your new book. We're going to talk about that. But this is very scary. We learned about this, about 30 minutes ago, an hour ago, in the middle of our show.
Sure.
Why do you think they're telling us this? Because I know there's a lot going on behind the scenes with the FBI.
Sure.
We don't always find out. Why do you think they're telling us this now, and what's your reaction?
Well, I think they're telling us because the scale of the planned attack is so significant, and I think it's important for us to be as transparent as we can be about these ongoing investigations. We want to tell the American people what's going on, of course, but I actually just heard about it this morning myself, and so this is a very, very dark stuff. And unfortunately, we were talking about this a little bit off camera, but this is what happens when people turn the rhetoric up so loud that disagreeing with somebody is a cause for violence. That's the place that we've come to, unfortunately, with too much of our political rhetoric. We got to tell everybody to tone it down. And I hate to say this, but it's true. You see more political violence and violent rhetoric coming from the left than the right these days. Everybody has a role to cut this stuff out. But I think a lot of my Democratic colleagues in Washington have got to look themselves in the mirror and say, why is so much of this political violence coming from our side of the spectrum? Maybe they can do something different.
Well, Mr. Vice President, this is a clear escalation. We know about the president, attacks against him, you and the rest of the cabinet. Those threats are public.
Yeah.
But this is going after the supporters. The people that were on that line was UFC, MAGA supporters, and they were the target here.
Yeah. Well, and thank God this attack was apparently thwarted or never got to the point where it was carried out. I mean, the event was so amazing, the sense of patriotism, the pride that everybody felt. It was a very fun evening. So this could have been a very terrible tragedy, but it goes to show why we have so much appreciation for the guys who keep us safe and for federal law enforcement, because these are the types of attacks that they're preventing every single day. As you guys know, they don't get the credit for the attacks they prevent. Right. They only get the blame for the attacks that actually happen. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that for every bad incident, there were 100 bad guys who are trying to do something worse. And thank God we've got smart and good people protecting us.
It's such a great point. And the former Deputy Director of the FBI, Dan Bongino, in the last hour talked about that the FBI has really been streamlined to deal with attack threats like this. I do want to ask you, though, to react to, based on what we know, one suspect allegedly told officials that the, quote, goal was to target capitalist elites, billionaires, and politicians who accept donations from AIPAC. Mm-hmm. Does that surprise you? And what do you make of that when you hear it?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all, because, again, so much of the far left rhetoric is driving itself towards violence. It spins people up into these crazy situations where they feel like, I'm not going to argue against somebody, or I'm not going to debate somebody, or even vote against a politician. I'm going to go and commit violence. It is unfortunately an inevitable consequence of some of the rhetoric that we're seeing. But what I'd say, too, is what we've done in the Trump administration that I'm very proud of, and again, we don't draw a lot of headlines to it because it's part of this investigatory work, is we're trying to look at the underground networks that drive towards this violence. 23 people do not get to the point where they're going to commit a mass terror incident in Washington, D.C. without some serious funding, without some serious coordination. And we've actually been trying to go with those networks of coordination, because it's a terrorist plot. That's not a few guys doing crazy stuff. That is a coordinated, planned terrorist plot. Thank God we thwarted it, but we got to do more of that stuff.
Well, Mr. Vice President, you have a very busy week. You have all the shows for your book, and then we're hearing on Friday you're going to maybe sign the Iran deal. We'll get into that in just a minute. But right now, our president is in Geneva for the G7 summit, and I think we have some images. We saw a meeting with Ukraine's President Zelensky earlier today. We also showed images of him meeting with the Emir of Qatar, and now he's meeting with the UAE leader who is there. How important is this, especially coming off of what we're learning about Iran and the deal? Is that why the French president invited some of these leaders from the Gulf states?
I actually don't know. I think they're probably invited because they're just important leaders of an important part of the world. But I think what is most interesting about the last year and a half, the underreported part of the Trump administration's policy in the Middle East, is that all of these Gulf Arab coalition partners are coming together with the United States. Israel is obviously very involved. and they're actually pushing back together. You see the United States working with our Gulf Arab partners in a way you've never seen before in the history of this country. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've gotten to the point where we have a very good peace deal that's on the table that we're ready to sign, is because you see for the first time the Gulf Coast countries pushing back against Iran, uniting under the president's leadership and actually doing something different for a change. You know, what's interesting is there's been a lot of chatter, of course, about this peace deal with Iran. And one of the questions I'm most often asked is, well, how is this different from the Obama JCPOA? And there are all of these answers I could give. Number one, we're not giving them a red cent of American money. Obama gave them over $1 billion in a pallet of cash. There are all these substantive differences. I actually think the most important difference is, you know what those Gulf Arab countries thought about the JCPOA? They hated it because they thought it empowered Iran to be a bad actor. Do you know what they think about the President Trump peace plan? They love it because they think that it's turning over a new leaf to a new Middle East. So there are so many big differences between, of course, our policy and the previous administrations. But what we've done here is actually unite the Gulf together. That could have transformative impacts, not for the next couple of years, but the next couple of generations.
So, Mr. Vice President, it's clear that they respect the commander-in-chief.
Yes, they do.
And Iran respects our military because of what we've been able to do. Some of the things that we're hearing about, we haven't seen the text yet, but just what we're hearing, that the deal would end all sanctions and all waivers. I'm hearing that it will be downblending, but not destruction of the nuclear dust. And there's no closing of the nuclear facilities. And they hope that there's no nuclear weapon for the next 15 years. There's also strong language about stopping funding the proxies, but it says in the deal that Iran has to use its best efforts, not stop it completely. There's also the $300 billion in reparations that's going to come from Qatar and some of the Gulf states, and then $24 billion in unfrozen assets. Is any of that true? And if it would be true, would that concern you?
Yeah, so most of that is basically Iranian propaganda, and you have to understand what's going on here, okay? So the Iranians have just had their conventional military destroyed. Their country has totally changed. They have a totally different leadership than they had even 3 months ago. And so what is happening is that some elements in their society are trying to sell this deal as positively as possible to their domestic audience. Now, that's expected. It's frustrating to me, but that's expected. What is a little unexpected and more frustrating to me is that you see certain people in the American media literally recirculating hardliner talking points from the IRGC instead of telling the truth about what's going on. So first of all, not a single cent of American money goes to Iran, not $300 billion, not $24 billion, not any of the money, the dollar figures that I've seen floating around. Number two, this is a firm commitment backed up by verifiable action to never develop or buy a nuclear weapon by the Iranians, which, remember, that was the whole point of this entire operation, is to ensure not just that Iran wouldn't have a nuclear weapon for the next couple of years, but that they would make that long-term commitment. Now, here's the important part, though, is there are benefits to Iran if they perform their end of the obligation, not money from the United States, but maybe Qatar or the UAE or Saudi Arabia, maybe they want to invest in Iran and build a power plant. The United States, our approach to that is going to be, yeah, you can do that so long as the Iranians are behaving properly. But if they don't behave properly, they don't get any of the benefits of this bargain. And so you see the propagandists who are saying, here are all the things Iran gets. And the fine print, which actually the big print in the actual agreement is, they don't get any of that stuff unless they totally transform themselves as a country. And if they do, that's a huge win for everybody, for the region. If they don't, no skin off our back.
So it's performance-based, Mr. Vice President, but as you mentioned, the hardliners at the IRGC, General Ahmad Vahidi is the head of the IRGC. He was the first commander of the Quds Force under the current Supreme Leader's father. He appears to be committed to his hardlines. So even if a deal is signed on Friday, which you will likely be at, will the phase two is the actual compliance, and Iran has shown they never wanted to do that. They cheat, they steal, they lie, and do what they want to do. What gives you reason to believe it's different this time?
Well, what gives me reason to believe is that I never believe and I never trust anybody's words. I trust people's actions. And what this deal, what the president's peace plan fundamentally does is it creates a two-pathway option for the United States of America. No matter what happens, Iran's nuclear program has been destroyed. They have no enrichment capacity. We destroyed it over the last year and a half. No matter what happens, their economy is in dire straits. The blockade and a number of the actions we've taken ensures that. No matter what happens, their conventional military has been destroyed, and they don't have the resources to rebuild it. But here's the option for Iran. If you learn the right lessons from this, and if you change the way that you react and respond to the United States, option one is we're going to change the way that we respond to you. We're going to have a better relationship. But if they choose option two, which is we're going to continue to try to pursue a nuclear weapon, then nothing that we don't commit to doing anything as part of this deal. So the United States wins either way. What the president is trying to do is actually extend the hand of peace and say, if the Iranian people want greater prosperity, then their leadership has to step up and change their behavior. If they do, great. If they don't, the United States has already gotten a lot from what we need.
As vice president, we assume you will probably run for president. I know you've been asked about this a lot lately. You said, I'm going to talk to my wife. I'll decide after the midterms. No doubt the president will be supportive. You're 41 years old. Donald Trump has said, remember when he asked the crowd a month ago, he said, do you want JD Vance? Do you want Marco? And everyone responded. And he said, I think they might make they might make good running mates together and be on the same ticket. Here he is talking about the two of you running together. Listen to this.
I study to see if they like each other. I just find it interesting. You know, it's life. It's big time stuff. I watch them together. They get along great. They have a good relationship. They're sort of similar in a lot of ways, but they're very talented. And I think the two of them running together as a team would be very unbeatable.
Now, at one point, Marco Rubio, Secretary Rubio, I should say, said at one point that he wouldn't run if he knew you were going to make the decision to run. Where does this stand now?
It stands where we're all focused on the job in front of us. I think the president loves to stir the pot a little bit, and the president loves the entertainment of it. Of course he does. This is what I joked earlier that, does it really sound like the president of the United States to run a televised program for who would be his next apprentice, right? That's what the president does, and he loves that. And it does make this whole thing fun. But fundamentally, I think Marco, me, the entire cabinet, we're just focused on doing a good job. And the thing I hate about politicians and politics writ large is it sometimes seems like in the past, I've only been in politics for 3 years. You elect somebody to do a job, and instead of doing their job, they're worried about the next job. What I said when I got this job is, I just want to do a good job at this thing that I have. And if that happens, the politics will take care of itself. We're only a year and a half into this administration, right? There's so much that we're accomplishing for the American people. Let's do that. Let's win the midterms, and then we can talk about what happens in 28.
Mr. Vice President, one thing I've always appreciated, you've always been candid with me.
Sure.
Even when I did your interview before you became vice president,
of course,
you were the only candidate that said, if I don't get picked, I'm going to be a little disappointed about that.
Yeah.
So tell me this. I'll ask the question a different way. What would take running for president of the United States off the table for you? Everybody wants to be president. Every vice president wants the job. It's just the political thing. So what would it take for you to just take it off the table? Something with family, something with God? What is it?
Well, obviously, to do anything, to run for the Senate, to run for vice president, to run for president, you have to feel like it's something that God wants you to do. I mean, I write about this. I think you have to have a certain spirit of humility about any of these things, and you have to do what is best for other people, not what serves your own ambition. You have to, of course, have the buy-in from your family, but fundamentally, man, I'll be candid with you because I always am. The way that I make decisions, and this is maybe I'm just different from other politicians like this, I don't plot things out. I make the decisions that are right in front of me. I try to do as well as I can, and then I figure it out when I've got to make a new decision. Because I don't have to make that decision, I just haven't thought about it that much.
That's fair.
Let's talk about your book for a second,
Yeah,
Mr. Vice
please.
President. And we were talking before you came on. This is a great book about finding your faith. And I'm a Catholic convert as well. So I've read this cover to cover because I'm so fascinated about it. But one of the chapters you have in here is called Semper Why.
Yep.
Play on the Semper Fi motto of the Marine Corps, always faithful.
Sure.
And you talk about during your deployment to Iraq in 2005, 2006, to the Anbar province, at the height of the worst fighting in Fallujah, Ramadi, you write that's where you essentially lost your faith.
That's right.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I was raised in a very devout household by, my dad would take us to church But my dad wasn't always in my life, right? I grew up a big chunk of my early childhood without my dad as a constant presence. My grandmother didn't really take us to church, and I don't think I was, in a lot of ways, properly formed in my faith. And so while I believed that Jesus was the Son of God and I cared a lot about it, I got to Iraq and that faith just collided with reality. I felt like God wasn't speaking to me anymore. You know, there was sort of violence all around us. I was dealing with these Iraqi poll workers, some of whom were devout Muslims. And, you know, you talk to them about faith, and I realized that I actually couldn't defend my faith as well as they could defend their faith. So I hadn't been properly formed in that way. But I also just didn't feel like my faith was really speaking to me. You know, back home, my grandmother had just died. There were a lot of family problems that happened when my grandmother died. My mom was struggling with addiction very badly at the time. And I just didn't feel like my faith was all that relevant. And part of what drew me back to faith is that I sort of looked around at the Christians that were in my life and the non-Christians that were in my life, and I realized, you know what? All the things that I care about as an atheist, as a person who thinks that he's rational and knows everything, I care about money and I care about prestige and I care about where I went to school. Those things aren't making me a good person. But these Christians who I dismissed, you know, when I was an arrogant atheist as these bumpkins, they've actually figured it out. They're happy, they're healthy, their kids are in a good place. And I thought to myself, if they're right about that, if they're right about how to live a good life, maybe they're right about Jesus being the Son of God. Maybe there's an inspiration for that character that I dismissed too easily when I was in Iraq.
You know what I noticed reading your book was a lot of us as parents, we want our children to have faith, and we want them to raise their children, our grandchildren,
Absolutely.
with faith. And we can lead them to the water, but we can't make them drink.
Exactly.
And so I liked that your grandmother watched Billy Graham. She loved Billy Graham.
She did.
She would take you to that little church where nobody was at church, but she loved that minister. Occasionally, she would take you. Y'all did some Pentecostal churches. And so talk about, after converting to Catholicism, sometimes we get so caught up in the denomination that Catholics and Protestants or you know, they don't think that this denomination is educated. The Ivy Leaguers are Episcopalians or they're Lutherans. You know, we get so caught up in that. How do we ensure that our children are just hearing the word so that we can raise generations that love God? Yeah,
so first, I remember when I was in boot camp and I met a kid from Eastern Kentucky, and then we had a guy in our boot camp platoon who was from a denomination, a Christian denomination I'd never heard of. And I wrote a letter home to my mama and I said, "What is this?" And she responded, "Well, it's just another branch of Christianity." And she said, "Honey, you know, in Eastern Kentucky, we're all snake handlers." And so that was her response to that. But I remember, that was obviously, she was joking with me, but she said, "It's all about Jesus." And that's one of the things I really love about the American church is there are all of these different pathways to God. Everybody has their own crises, their own blessings, their own moments of grace, their own moments of struggle. But I think that what's really cool about the American church is it's so dynamic because we're all forced to really deal with these issues. Like, you can't be an American Catholic or an American Pentecostal or an American Southern Baptist without running into somebody who has a slightly different perspective on faith. Yes, Jesus is all that matters, but I think one of the ways that we come to know God is by talking about him and trying to understand him. And that's what I love about the American church is we're all kind of figuring that out together. Different ways, sometimes with snake handlers, sometimes with speaking in tongues, sometimes with a beautiful Catholic Mass. But I think all these pathways really matter, and they're part of the reason why we do find our path to God.
Powerful.
Very
Thank you,
powerful.
Mr. Vice
Thank
President.
you.
I'm on page 129. I'm looking forward to finishing it.
You got to finish it, man. Communion, please buy it.
Communion.
What a great book. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And by the way, you have an invitation. If you decide to jump into the 2028 race, great place to do it right here on the couch.
I'll keep that in mind.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.